I believe we are live on YouTube at this point, streaming live. So I think here's this Agile thing. Hey, everybody. My name's Matt Beam.
I'm Mike Markey.
I'm Jeff Singleton.
And I'm Klaus.
Hello, Klaus. Thank you for joining us today.
Good evening.
Yeah, it's 5 p.m. there in Austria.
Yes.
Yes. So we were hoping that you could join us today and tell us about flight levels. It's super interesting to me, and I think these guys too. But first, do you want to just sort of give us an introduction? Where do you come from? How did you get involved in this kind of work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. The short version. So I'm Klaus Leopold. Leopold is my last name. And yeah, I'm located here in Europe, in Vienna, Austria. And well, I am doing flight levels all day long, kind of. So I kind of created flight levels out of, I think, the need to overcome local sub-optimization. Because what I've seen is that many companies were just like making teams agile, and there was a bunch of agile teams running around, but you didn't see, like, from an organizational perspective, a lot of improvement. And this is where I tried to find, let's say, some pictures to explain that agile teams alone is, you need to do more than this. You need to fly a little bit higher and make sure that the right team is working on the right stuff at the right time. And this is somehow how flight levels emerged over the past, I don't know, I guess 2011 we started or so. So it's already quite a long time. Since I'm working on this picture or metaphor of flight levels.
Interesting. 2011. So that's about the same time. I'm sure you've heard of the Scaled Agile Framework.
Yeah.
SAFe. Yeah. If it seems like you were like solving the same problem that they were, sort of, but in a different way. It's weird. I've looked at a bunch of different scaling frameworks, and they have a lot of the same sort of things in them. But your approach seems to be like more flexible, I guess I would say. Or maybe I won't put words in your mouth.
Well,
like,
why
how
don't
is
we?
it-
Yeah, why
or
don't we?
Mike?
Why don't we start from for the benefit of the audience and those who are not familiar with flight levels? Why don't we start out with what distinguishes flight levels, or what is it? What's the gist if he gave the 5-minute
Yeah.
overview?
Yeah.
So as I said, so 2011, that's where it started, and back then we only had 2 flight levels. So it somehow emerged, right? Flight levels is kind of I don't want to say that it is a scaling framework, because I don't think it is. It's more like a thinking model, but this sounds so unsexy. But it's more something like what you it's a way of thinking to overcome this local sub-optimization. What does this mean? So the idea is that flight levels is already there. You don't have to introduce it in your company, because flight levels is already there. What does it mean? So the idea is that you have 3 flight levels. Flight level 1 is the operational level. That's the teams that they are doing their operational work, right? Most of the time, one team alone cannot generate 100% of the customer value. You know the situation. You need multiple teams that need to coordinate in order to generate value for the customer. And that's a problem that we, in flight levels land, solve on flight level 2. So this means we need to fly a little bit higher. We need to zoom out a little bit. So on flight level 2, we make sure that the right team is working on the right stuff at the right time. Flight level 2 is about coordination. So flight level 1 is the operational level. On flight level 2, we are coordinating that the right team is working on the right stuff at the right time. The cool thing is that we don't care about methods, for instance. So on flight level 1, people can do, I don't know, they can work with Kanban, they can work with Scrum, or they can just work. That's also fine, right? On flight level 2, we just make sure that the right people are working on the right stuff at the right time. Then, from time to time, so one more thing about flight level 2, coordination level. And coordination level, flight level 2 is a lot about the products you have. Products, services, all the things that somehow delight your customers. Yeah. Yeah, from time to time, one might probably ask the question, are we heading into the right direction? And to answer this question, we need to zoom out again or fly a little bit higher. This is flight level 3. Flight level 3, we enter the strategic level. This what we are doing is we are trying to align the work in the organization to the strategy. We want to somehow break free from PowerPoint slides, and we want to connect strategy with the operations. That's the idea of flight level 3. So these 3 flight levels, and what you do is you apply 5 activities on these flight levels in order to, kind of see where the problems are, and then you solve the problems that you see that pop up. And one thing is important. These 3 flight levels, they are already there in your organization because there are teams working. You do some kind of coordination. Maybe it's not the best way of coordination, but you do some kind of coordination. So let's apply flight level thinking on flight level 2 and let's try to fix it. And hopefully you think about the future of your company, of your organization. That's flight level 3, right? Maybe you don't have fancy strategic frameworks in place, but you think about the future, right? And with flight level 3, you can improve this. So that's like flight levels in a nutshell.
That's interesting. So what I hear you saying is this is not about installing or introducing a new idea or a new, you're saying the reality on the ground is this stuff is already happening in some form or fashion, well or not well. And you're saying, let's clarify what we're doing and how to do it better. Is that,
That's exactly the point. Yeah. And this clarification process is kind of what you're doing is you're applying 5 activities on all of these levels. You're visualizing your situation. Yeah, because it's not fun to fly blind. So we want to see actually what's going on. We want to create focus. We value finished work more than starting work. Number 3 is we establish agile interactions. We make sure the right people, talk about the right stuff at the right time. We measure progress. Yeah, doing flight levels for the sake of doing flight levels is quite unsexy. We want to achieve something with it. And so we want to also measure the progress if we are, achieving what we want to achieve. And activity number 5 is to improve. And this kind of loops again to activity number 1. And so you are never ever done when you're doing with flight level or when you're working in a flight levels mode because you are always improving. And the idea is to apply these 5 activities on the 3 flight levels. That's what's behind it.
Super interesting. It feels like more of a pattern or a pattern library. Would that be fair?
Pattern is actually a good wording because when you run through the system design of a flight level 2 system, for instance, or of a flight level 3 system, we work with a lot of patterns. So the thing is, I don't know how each and every company in this planet shall work best. I'm not smart enough. But I'm quite sure there is not a single truth of it. But there are some patterns that we've seen that worked in some given contexts, right? So what we did is we are collecting these patterns, we are showing these patterns, and then it's kind of playing a little bit of Lego. You know, you have these Lego pieces like the patterns, and then you kind of build your own way of working. Yeah.
So when you're done with an organization, or when you have sort of successfully completed, you haven't specified how they're going to do this stuff, but there will be a specific answer to how this organization has visualized, has created focus, has established the direction, is measuring the progress, and how they're improving. So they have a specific way, but it emerges from the process of applying these principles. Yeah.
That's the idea behind it. Exactly. So you build your own way of working using these patterns and combining these patterns. And maybe you come up with something completely new. Hopefully you come up with something completely new because maybe you are unique in a certain way. Perfect. Do it. And the thing is, when you are going into this this mode of working, you always see where the problem is. And then you can ignore the problem or you can try to fix it. So you always has options, right? And I don't say you have to fix all the problems at once, because maybe that's in terms of culture quite tricky, right? It's too much of a change. But maybe you are more like a revolutionary guy, and you're like, yes, let's change all these kind of things. But this is up to you. So yeah, you decide.
So
as a company.
there's always going to be a fair amount of change management for that particular organization.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're looking at this from the point of view of a leader who needs to do it, I mean, there are off-the-shelf sort of tools you could use for each one of these. That you could plug in Scrum, you could plug in, different ways to visualize or improve or anything. So it's not like they have to invent everything. They could, to your point, like they could come up with something unique that's new, but it wouldn't necessarily need to do that, right? They could maybe take something that just happens to work for them.
Yeah, exactly. So you can even combine it. So it's not an either or. So what we see very, very often, like for instance on flight level 1, there is something like Scrum going on. So, but still, we want to make sure that the right Scrum team is working on the right stuff at the right time. And in particular, because multiple Scrum teams need to coordinate in order to generate value, especially when you're working on a bigger product or something like this. Yeah. So yeah, you just let everything untouched on flight level 1, because if Scrum is working, why should we change it? Doesn't make any sense. But maybe we try to introduce a flight level 2 to make this coordination a little bit better. So it's not an either or.
Okay, so coordination happens on flight level 2. So when you said we've got these 5 steps you're looping through and in a continual improvement vein at each flight level, do the 3 flight levels operate at a different cadence in that loop? Do you think is the speed of going through the loop faster in the smaller, and then at flight level 2 it's a slower loop, and at flight level 3 it's a longer one? Okay.
Definitely. So I mean, of course, there is no like single true answer to this, but like most of the time on flight level 1, you are thinking in like weeks. Yeah, like for instance, Scrum 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So this is your horizon. On a flight level 2, it's more like a month, like 1 month or something like this. And on a flight level 3, it's years. So the horizon is much wider, especially when we talk about strategy, right? So we probably have a 3-year strategy, but the point of flight level 3 is not to like get stuck in this 3 years thinking. What we want to do is we want to narrow the time funnel somehow. So we have our 3-year strategy. But what does this mean for the next year? What does this mean, for instance, for the next quarter? So we somehow break it down so that it can connect to the flight level 2, where you are thinking in months. And this is just like, yeah, most of the time, like weeks, months, years, if this makes sense.
100%.
All right, so
what are the
go ahead,
Mike.
Well, I was going to say usually for
just-
something like this, there's a metaphor we're building off of, right? So flight levels has a very evocative term. Like, where did the concept of flight levels come from your perspective? Like, why flight levels?
So, I mean, why flight levels? So there was this particular moment in time, and I guess this was 2011. This is where I first coined the term flight level. So this was a company and German engineering company, and they were like, we want to go agile. So we have roughly 340 teams or something like this, and they were like, make these teams agile. And I was like, that sounds interesting.
340 teams?
Yes,
Like,
yes,
that's a
that's
lot
quite a
to
quite a
transform.
huge
Yeah.
number, right? So I was already configuring my new Porsche 911, right? Because this would have been a nice.
Yeah, if you can
contract,
figure that
right?
out. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
big deal.
exactly.
Yeah.
But then I was like, okay, but if we really start this endeavor, we're doing probably the biggest sub optimization in history of Agile, kind of. So I was like, okay, I was trying to find pictures. So it doesn't make sense if we have these 340 teams running around, especially we're talking about an engineering company. So there was a lot of hardware development going on. You had physicists running around. You had, I don't know, engine guys and I don't know, software people and everything. So it doesn't make sense if they are somehow, doing stand-up meetings now and working in the sprint mode. We need to make sure that the right team works on the right stuff at the right time. So we need to zoom out a little bit. We need to fly higher. This is where flight level just like came up. So we need to fly higher. We need to enter a different flight level. We need to detach from the teams and solve this problem on a different level. And then somehow flight levels resonated, the term. And I started to use it and build all the things like what I'm doing now on this picture, kind of.
Yeah, I have to say it resonated with me immediately because it's like all, really good ideas or breakthrough things seem obvious in retrospect, but they weren't, right? My dad was an airline pilot. Jeff's a pilot. And the metaphor of like what you do on the ground, right? You have to make very small, like you have to get on the right taxiway, and we're talking about feet, right? You get up in the air and you're like, okay, so now I need to get out of the local airspace. And then the third level, you're up at 40,000 feet and you're going across the continent, right?
Yeah.
Very different phases of flight. It just sort of fell in line for me. I think it's a great metaphor.
Yeah, Klaus, I was curious, and I'm glad you addressed this in terms of a real life example, because this all makes perfect sense. And I think a lot of us have recognized that, number one, sub-optimization is suboptimal, local optimization, but having a real life example. So you had to have had some conversations. If they initially brought you in to make an entire organization agile, at some point I would assume early on, you had to have a conversation with them to shift the focus to not just, here, I'm going to make 340 teams do agile, and elevate that conversation so that they saw early on that it's not just, at the team level. How did that conversation go?
So I think there was this kind of tipping point, I guess, would be an English term for it. So I did with a group of managers an experiment, so a shipbuilding experiment. So what we were doing is we were building paper ships. And we were building it in two different modes. The first mode was like in unfocused push system. And the second one was in a focused pull system. And what you could see in this experiment, so the experiment is set up like this, that there is one bottleneck. And then you could see that a lot of work is piling up in front of the bottleneck. And in the first round, you had a cycle time of, I guess 8 minutes or so to finish one of the paper ships. And in the second round, the cycle time was less than a minute. So there was a tremendous improvement between these two rounds. And this is the point of creating focus, right? So I got this message across of creating focus. And then they were like, okay, perfect. So if one of this paper ship lane is a team, we just do that all our teams are working in this focused mode. And then we are fine. But then I said, okay, let's rethink this whole thing a little bit. Let's imagine one of this ship production line is one of your products. And this resonated quite a lot with them because they had a lot of products on the market. So they were like, yes, this is one product. Perfect. So now one single person in this line is not a person. Let's assume it's a team. Yeah. And then you could see that teams became a bottleneck. And then we somehow rephrased this experiment. What would happen if we would introduce like this way of creating focus across multiple teams compared to only one team? The problem is, so the point is, if you are creating focus, you're removing work out of the system. So the work that's in the system is tremendously fast done. So you're removing the work out of the system. Like in Kanban, we're talking about WIP limits, for instance, right? That's one way of creating focus. In Scrum, like sprints, that's one way of creating focus, yeah? But the point is, when you are applying this idea of creating focus across multiple teams, you get to this result. When you apply it on the team level, you don't get to this result. Because what does it mean if you are creating focus on the team level? The team puts all the work that's not started into a backlog. So now you have a lot of full backlogs in your company, and you still have the same problem. You probably have a team that's working light with light speed, right? But on the product scale, you don't see any improvement because the teams, they are all putting their stuff into their team backlogs. And when you rethink this on a flight level 2, you have one common backlog across these teams. And this is where the magic happens. And this was like for these managers, they were sitting there and they were like, oh, damn it, yes. So this doesn't make any sense to work on the team level. We need to zoom out. So this was a quite long story. I hope it somehow got across what I want to say. But this is the problem. So you're not solving the problem with local backlogs that are full. You need to have one common backlog, kind of. Yeah. And you only get this on a flight level 2. If you zoom out, if you fly a little bit higher.
And so to take that, and I like that, I'm glad you expounded upon that, because it isn't just a simple, okay, and you just do this. These are conversations that have to evolve, and they're fairly delicate conversations to get people to see what's going on. So then the next level, were you able to extend that even higher to the, I guess it would be the executive level?
You mean flight level 3?
Yeah, flight level 3.
Yeah. Flight level 3 is, this was actually years later. I think 2013 or 2014 was the first time when we were talking about flight level 3. But this has also to do with my own development, you know. So flight levels is born out of practice. I'm a practical guy. I'm working with companies and I'm doing things, and everything is just like born out of practice. And back then I didn't get a lot of mandates where we were talking about strategy and all these kind of things. So it wasn't a topic for me. But then the first strategy topics popped up, and that's what I mean. What I meant before. I continued to think in flight levels, and then we added flight level 3. Yeah. So but it somehow made sense because on a flight level 2 you're trying to do the thing right. Yeah. And on flight level 3 you try to do the right thing. So I guess Peter Drucker came up with this with these wording, and so only doing the thing right alone is not enough. And 2013, 2014, I got more and more companies who were interested in strategy, and then we created flight level 3, kind of.
It's so interesting. It sounds like, I mean, Agile's become sort of a dirty word. But like what I hear you saying is my definition of Agile. You're focused on learning, you're focused on solving real problems and getting real measurable results, right? You're doing the thing and helping other people do it and getting better. That's the heart of this this discussion that we're trying to have.
And I think when we are not changing flight levels, so flight levels is still dynamic. We're still changing things there. And when we stop changing it, we are dead, because then it's I don't know. It's no longer living, right? So you need to change these things all the time, and this also holds true for like a thinking model, or however you want to call it, like flight levels. It has to be changed all the time. I mean, I've worked with groups
medium-sized companies that have, let's say, a dozen teams or so, and they're trying to deliver certain things together. And maybe it's a subset of these 3 teams that have to do one big project, and it's a different 4 teams that have to do this project. And they've struggled in various situations with understanding how do they know the work and how do they. But if they don't have, what I hear you saying is if they don't have a way to visualize it, like if they don't have a concrete view in some form, like maybe that's a Miro board, maybe that's some tool that rolls everything up. Like if they can't directly perceive with their actual eyes a map, that's kind of hopeless to be able to see all that stuff and understand it and make decisions. Is that kind of what your experience has been?
At least that's what I experience all the time, because you help people see, so and that's the point. So they are, so I don't know, these managers, these are highly intelligent people, so it's not that they don't know, right? But it's sometimes not very intuitive, and if you don't see it, it's, I don't know, it's not tangible. And this kind of visualization is just like, help people see. I think that's really what's going on, and without it, it's quite difficult. And I'm quite painless in terms of how this visualization looks like. So whether this is a tool, or as I said, is it a Miro board, or is it a whiteboard? Sometimes even an Excel spreadsheet, and I'm really not a huge fan of it. But if they are like, okay, this makes sense to us, better this than nothing, right? So let's start there.
Yeah, I've seen a ton of Excel spreadsheets in my day that were meant to represent a ton of stuff. But it makes, human beings are highly visual creatures, right? There's a lot of the brain that's dedicated to visual perception and making sense of 3D space. And so it's like, that's really like if you're trying to stuff information into a person's brain, that's the wide, high bandwidth channel, the high resolution channel. Like it's just going to be easier, right? It feels like it's even below Agile or anything. It's like the way the human brain works is if you want to convey and clarify a large amount of information, and especially how it relates to each other, visually is the way to go. Because what's the alternative? You'll have to read through all these different descriptions of different parts, and then you'll have to visualize it in your head. You'll have to somehow like create a model in your head and then integrate the whole thing, keep it in working memory, and then play with different parts to see the dependencies. It's just way harder as opposed to seeing, like externalizing that in some form and being able to like offload that work. And it's not necessarily intuitive to people. It is super interesting because it has nothing to do with people being smart. It's just like they just have to play with it, and then they find it compelling. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, there is a visualization that everybody has been using for decades. That's the Gantt chart. It's a great visualization. Most projects seems like level 2 is relying heavily on that visualization. And I like that Jeff is smirking now. I've been in a lot of organizations where that Gantt chart becomes I don't know, an ankle bracelet, something around a dead weight they're carrying around. Like, we went to all the trouble to make this map, and therefore this is the plan. And all their optimizations come from trying to align back to the drawing that they initially came up with, rather than responding to the change in a dynamic way. So is there a mechanism in flight levels that addresses that instead?
So let me add 1 or 2 sentences to the Gantt chart. So for me, a Gantt chart is something like a knife. You can do great things with a knife, but you also can do not so great things with a knife. And I think it's a tool. And I personally, from time to time, use Gantt charts. But the thing is, how are you working with them? If you treat them as that's the holy truth, that's the plan, and we have to follow the plan, and we have to, like, if this is your goal, that's totally not the point for me. For me, a Gantt chart is just like a visualization which somehow brings some dependencies and time in a correlation. Full stop.
Yeah.
One thing is if I say, okay, and now this is the truth and I have to follow it, then we are having troubles, right? So it's more like working on these kind of things. And the same is true for these Excel spreadsheets. I'm really not a fan because I think a mirror board or something like this is much better. But it's again, it's about how you're working with these tools. And I don't want to say the M word, the mindset word, but that's where that's what we have to somehow, get around. If it makes sense.
I have two M words that I try not to say. It's mental model. But yeah, I totally agree. Like whenever I see a representation of any work, even if it's a sprint backlog, what I tell you is like this is not a commitment. Actually, they took the word commitment out of the sprint guide. I don't know if you noticed. Like this is not a commitment. It is an intention. It's a list of the valuable problems, roughly in the order that we think we want to do them. It's where we intend to go. But the whole point of using any agile approach is that we know that our knowledge is incomplete, stuff is going to change, we're going to have to adjust. So it doesn't make any sense to say we're going to deliver this scope on January. Like, if we could do that, we would just like use a more traditional or more fixed project management. Yeah, we would just line up the stuff when we know how long it's going to take and what's going to happen. And then we could give you commitments because we've been there before, but we've never been to this place that we're going to. Yeah. So we have to build in some uncertainty. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It depends on the degree of certainty. So if you're, I don't know, if you're in a factory and you have like an established process where you like, reduced variability to a minimum, because that's what you're doing when you're in manufacturing, and you can do it there. That's the thing, right? But you cannot apply the same way of thinking to knowledge work. Knowledge work is different, right? And there is uncertainty. And the thing is, we need to we need to live with it. Otherwise, it's getting really tough. We have to accept it.
And we do people a disservice by giving them the illusion of certainty that they will get this thing at this time. Because, like you said, in a factory, we're probably building thousands of copies of the same thing, so we can drive out the variability. This thing, it's
everything
we know
is
there's
unique.
variability.
It's like you're building it all the first time.
Yeah,
totally.
Even if it looks a little like something you've already built.
Yeah. And this was always like a little bit a problem kind of that I had with some agile evangelists when they were always like saying, okay, plan is not the right tool, or don't use these kind of things. I think it's not the plan. So I treat myself, I think I'm quite adaptable and agile in my way of working. But I love to do plans. But a plan is never ever a commitment. It's just like, if the future turns out like in a way like I think today, this could be a sequence of actions that could happen. And there's a lot of probability in there. And usually life never ever turns out like expected, right? But the thing is, if I have one kind of future in this plan, maybe I have a plan B and a plan C. So I have 3 different scenarios how it could turn out, and it turns out completely different. And let's adapt. So I like this, but that's me personally. I like this having options of the future, right? And that's a plan for me. But I'm not committing to this plan. I'm changing the plan. It's a tool.
Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, as Mike Tyson said. He was a famous boxer. Really, really great boxer, but even he couldn't know what was going to happen. He had to be flexible.
So you always need to react, of course. But I'm quite sure that Mike Tyson, somehow analyzed his opponent and had an idea, had a strategy for this fight. But then, yes, you're in the fight, and then you have to adjust, right?
Yep.
Maybe you have to bite his ear off.
I never really thought of Mike
That
Tyson
definitely
as
was
being
not-
a strategist. It's just really more of a
He was
pugilist
prepared,
more.
that's for sure. And I'm sure the air biting was not in the plan.
That was an
So anyway.
adaptation. In this moment,
It was.
I think I need something else,
Yeah,
and my
exactly.
hands are full. So
It might have been a sub-optimization.
Yeah. Maybe not the best example, but I think
Yeah.
we're talking about the same things.
Yeah, it gets messy at some point. So Klaus, I'm hearing a lot of, like you said, bottleneck. You said optimization. It suggests the theory of constraints to me. Was that something that just sort of like this sort of the same approach? Was it like just it emerged as you engaged with the problem and you realized what you needed to do, or had you? Is it a thing that you intentionally built in? How would you say? What's the overlap there? And do you use that stuff explicitly, or is it just sort of implicit? Because it's the same,
So
a lot of the same ideas. Yeah.
yeah, so my background is I started this whole agile kind of thing right at the beginning where Kanban was kind of emerging. So this is where I came into it, and there was like theory of constraints was one part and bottleneck in the Kanban world. But I always knew that this concept is great to get to help people see. You cannot apply it the same way to knowledge work than you do it for manufacturing. So I'm always quite cautious. But still, there are bottlenecks. But the nature of bottlenecks in knowledge work is different than the nature of bottlenecks in manufacturing. In knowledge work, we see not so many constant bottlenecks or stable bottlenecks. We have moving bottlenecks. This means one time the bottleneck is here, and then for another work item, the bottleneck is somewhere else, because somewhere it takes, I don't know, days or weeks or months to figure out how to do it, but once we know, it's quite easy to implement. And sometimes it's the other way around, right? We exactly know what to do, but we have no freaking clue how to get there. So this is where bottlenecks are just like shifting around in the organization. So you cannot apply the exact same way of thinking, but still you can get concepts across when you're talking with managers and when you're explaining stuff. And I think there for this reason I really love this idea behind bottlenecks. And we can also talk about variability and all these kind of things, but still be cautious when you apply it to knowledge work. That's
super interesting. So the theory of constraints in manufacturing, the bottleneck is based on machines, like material stuff. So it's not going to change as fast. Whereas in knowledge work, like let's say you're in a software context, software is soft, right? It's very malleable, stuff changes. And so today the bottleneck might be this person on this team doesn't know how to do this thing, and it's just slowing everybody else down. But as soon as that person figures it out, that bottleneck is resolved, and now there's always a different, like, okay, so it moves. Yeah, super
it's
interesting.
moving around. But still, you still have this concept of bottlenecks. And most of the time, it's not one. You have multiple bottlenecks at the same time, and they are shifting around. So it's you cannot apply the TOC thinking like 101 to knowledge work.
So what I hear you saying is there's always some part of the system that is the slowest part of the system that's keeping the rest of the system from going faster. That could be a knowledge gap. It could probably also be like a process gap. Like if there's a team that has a super inefficient process, they're not managing their work in process, so their cycle times go way down. It could be that some part of the system doesn't have a way to visualize the plan, so they can't come up with a good plan. Okay. Yeah.
Also,
Well,
like
the way that
resources. So we want to test something, but the test equipment is blocked by another product or something like this. So there are multiple ways of these kind of bottlenecks. Yeah.
So somebody has to actively manage the system. I think.
Yeah, but theory of constraints comes in and says there's only one discernible bottleneck at a time. It's like you'll see one thing is slowing the system down, and you'll fix that, and then you'll reveal the next one. So there could be two processes that are running just this far apart, but the one that's the slowest is the one that's going to show up. And then it's going to reveal the other one later if you fix the first bottleneck. So if there's any project management or resource management, the dreaded R word, involved at all, it's in keeping an eye on those bottlenecks and trying to figure out where the next one is and seeing if there's something that we can do. Is this a momentary blip? Because we're working in software, different work items will have different rates through the system because they impact different stations, if you will.
Yes.
And so you always want to be optimizing the system as much as you can, but there will be moments in time when you're working on a certain type of work. There's a protocol we're invoking, and that is the bottleneck of knowledge for people, and so that's going to fall behind. But if we go and tune the team based on that, when we get you back to the other type of work, that retuning isn't going to be helpful. So we're going to need to be kind of look at it. I would imagine that would be more of a flight level 2 observation, that you're looking at that, maybe.
Exactly. Especially when it comes to bottlenecks, the flight level 2 is essential, because I don't want to, most of the time, I don't want to fix a bottleneck within a single team. If it comes to the product, I'm selling a product to the market or a service to the market, right? I want to optimize this. And here, maybe different teams are the bottlenecks. So first, I want to figure out on a flight level 2, where do we have the problems? And then in the next step, we can talk about the flight level 1. So that's the essential part of flight level 2, where you really like focus on value creation and not on the operational level, kind of. Yeah.
In a
And I
flight
think
level 1,
especially on
sorry.
flight level. Sorry. No, go ahead.
I think we got a slight delay with you, but go ahead with your statement.
I just wanted to say flight level 2 is really the missing link when it comes to creating value for the customer, because that's exactly the target. I don't care about I don't watch the individual teams. I watch where we are in creating value to the customers. And this is a different way of thinking, and also a different way of applying all this logic like TOC and so on. But that's really the missing link in so many organizations. Many organizations, they are great in the operational level, so they have teams working in Scrum and whatever, Kanban, and many organizations are also quite good in their strategy. But in between, there is void, kind of.
Gooey middle.
It's always the middle.
Yes.
It's always the middle that's the problem.
It is.
So in level 1...
Yeah, because that's where the outcomes are actually created, is what I hear you saying. So that's you want to measure at where the rubber hits the road. Yeah.
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 Sorry,
So
Ryan. Go ahead.
at flight level 1, does the optimization, like say you're using Scrum at flight level 1, do you find the optimization is aligning with, say, retrospectives or reviews of Scrum? Or does flight levels give you, do you pull the levers at different times? Or do you use the cadence of something like Scrum to help you with that?
Usually, so I mean, you have if maybe Scrum is a good example. On a flight level 2, you will see similar things going on, but it's at the different scale. So when you have something like a daily Scrum meeting, on a flight level 1, usually you have something similar on a flight level 2, but it's not on a daily basis. It's once per week or twice per week, and it's across the teams. So usually each of the Scrum teams or Kanban teams or of the flight level 1 teams, whatever they are doing, right? They send 1 or 2 representatives in a flight level 2 stand-up. And then we're having a stand-up there. And then we're coordinating across the teams. And then they go back to flight level 1 with all this information, and they're having a stand-up meeting there. And the same is true for something like a retrospective. So if we want to learn, that's great. So let's learn on flight level 1. But let's bring the people together on a flight level 2, and let's learn across the teams, right? So we don't want to only learn in the team. We also want to learn how we actually collaborate across the teams, and how we want to learn how we better create value for the end customer, because that's the point of flight level 2, right? So you have all these kind of things. When you have a planning meeting, you also have a planning meeting on flight level 2, most likely, right? But it's always across the flight level 1 teams. That's the idea behind it. You need to set up all this operation on flight level 2, kind of similar to flight level 1, but it's always across teams.
It's almost like a fractal.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I love fractals.
It's a self-similar pattern that recreates itself across different scales. It's the same idea.
Exactly.
What you're doing, how you're doing it, how to improve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's actually a colleague, Andreas Rhein, also he's from Germany, and he wrote in one of his books, actually, I think also about flight levels as a fractal thing. And flight levels is fractal because you really see it grow kind of like fractals. You always do the same things, but the scale doesn't matter actually. It's a different.
So
Yeah.
interesting. It reminds me of like the hidden simplicity that Goldratt talked about, right? There's a lot of complexity and a lot of stuff, but if you cut through to the essence of it, you find the same stuff, right? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of echoes of things like Scrum of Scrums in this, but I like the
100%.
fact that it's sort of terminology agnostic. Like we're not gonna set off any agile flags or agile alarms with people by having flight level discussions.
Or infringe any intellectual property. Like it's just.
Well, there's,
you know,
I mean, I've
yeah.
had an organization I've worked with where any agile terminology was met with resistance instantly. But this is, they actually have some
Yeah.
alignment with aircraft in the organization, and therefore to come at them with this metaphor instead might make a little bit more sense or might actually fly in under their radar.
I like that you came up with the example of Scrum of Scrums. That's one more example what I said very early in our conversation, that flight levels is already there. So Scrum of Scrum is kind of a flight level too. What we do with flight levels now is we make it explicit. So let's visualize our Scrum of Scrum, right? Let's create focus. How do we actually manage our interaction? So we apply these 5 activities now on our Scrum of Scrum. So we make it tangible, and then we can improve it. So it's always about making it tangible, maybe tangible is the right word. And then based on what we see, we can improve. And this is where we always hit the borders of methods and frameworks, because we want to improve the Scrum of Scrum. We don't want to stick to Scrum of Scrum. We want to improve our Scrum of Scrum. We want to tailor it to our specific needs. So it's always like, for me, the method is kind of these guard wheels. Are they called guard wheels on a bike? Yeah. You have these
Training
methods,
wheels?
but
Yeah.
Training wheels. Yeah. And once you understand how it works, and flight levels helps you to understand how it works, right? You don't need the training wheels anymore because you go your own way, kind of. Yeah. And that's always the same pattern behind it. You apply it, whatever is there, you see what's going on, and then you improve, and then you make it to your thing.
I love the training wheels metaphor because it's interesting. Training wheels can be useful to get you upright and learn, but you'll never be able to go fast on a bike until you get rid of the training wheels, right?
Yes,
I think
good point.
that rhymes. Yeah. So we're coming up close to time. I have one more question, I think, from me, and then we'll see if these guys have anything. You talked about moving from a push system to a pull system, which is, I think, essential, right? If we're going to get really good. The situation I've seen a bunch of times is that there's a push system in place, right? And there are dates that are established and scope with the dates. And so we talked about how some of this stuff is counterintuitive, right? There's this idea that people have that if I want to get something done faster, I need to start it faster. I need to start it sooner, right? And so this underlying assumption is what causes people to push stuff into the system. Even when the system is overloaded, right? Even when work in process is high, and we know that high work in process means that there's a lot of context switching, and we've measured, right? Like, it's not an opinion. Like, we know scientifically, if you're doing 9 things, each one of those things takes longer, right?
Yeah.
Than if you're doing, and so it's actually faster if you delay the start of the work, and then measure it over time and throughput. I guess my question is, do you have any approaches or visualizations or metaphors or ways of talking about this to people to make it more clear to them? Or do you just say, we're gonna set up some basic metrics and then we're gonna try it and see what happens and convince them? Like, what's the best way into that conversation, do you think?
Yeah, I guess that's one of the very difficult nuts to crack, so to say, because it's totally not intuitive. But if you understand something like Little's law, it's a mathematical proof behind it, right? So when you start earlier, you will finish later. But this doesn't make any sense. But the point is, when you add more whip to your system, your work load increases, which means your lead time or cycle time will increase. So starting earlier means adding more whip to the system. This means your cycle time is longer, right? So it's totally counterintuitive. What I'm doing to get this message across, this is exactly the shipbuilding game, because then in the debrief you can come up with tons of thought experiments where you are like elaborating exactly on these topics. So we also have an online version of this game. So we're not building ships, but we are like in Miro, we are building like parallelograms or something like this. But it's the same idea behind it, right? And this is the most important thing, I think, to get exactly these messages across. And it's about the debrief. It's not about building the ships. It's about what you do with what you've learned then, right?
So it sounds like people have to experience this for themselves. Like they can't just necessarily take the explanation. They have to see how it actually works to really.
At least it
convinced.
helps. I mean, I know there are quite some people who are, I don't know who, mathematicians, for instance, they don't need to experience everything. It's just like, this makes sense. Perfect. Yeah. But one thing is, even if you experience it, or if you learn it through reading through the Little's law proof, the mathematical proof, no matter how you come to your enlightenment, kind of, the tricky part is to make it happen. One thing is to understand it. I personally understand it, but it feels so weird. We have so many work here, right? And you tell me I should.
We got to get going.
Yeah.
We got to go.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's the
We're
tricky
never
part.
gonna get there.
And I think I really know this stuff. And I'm running the Flight Levels Academy with some colleagues. And I think I really know this stuff, but I always get into this trap. But then I'm like, but no, we know. Okay, let's not do it. But it's so hard. It's really hard. But
It's so
But this is
interesting.
not started, and that's bad.
Any other-
I'm terrible at that. I will start everything. I've got a million unfinished projects around my house, much to my wife's chagrin.
It feels much better.
It does until you look at the pile of in progress work and go, I'm never finishing any of this now. It's just
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we're just about out of time. Klaus, is there anything you would like to let our audience know about? You mentioned the Flight Levels Academy. Are there upcoming classes, events, anything that you're about to release that you'd like to let us know? Yeah.
So Flight Levels Academy. So we teach flight levels, and we have online workshops, which is actually quite nice, self-paced workshops. So you can just immediately start with, for instance, Flight Level 3 design and apply all these ideas to your work context. And before October, I don't know exactly when, but hopefully before October, we are launching also the self-paced Flight Level 2 design workshop. And there's also this experiment in there with a debrief where I kind of explain all these kind of things, theory of constraints, how you apply it to knowledge work, and so on. So if you're interested, that's probably a good way to get into the flight levels land.
And I would just Google Flight Levels.
.io. Flightlevels.io.
Awesome. Well, I guess that's about it, right, gentlemen? Anything else we want to go over before we end?
Unless there's anything, Klaus, that you wish we asked you.
That's a great question. Yeah.
Well, I think we covered quite a lot, especially Flight Level 2. So yeah, I think Flight Level 2 is important. So I'm super happy. Thanks for this nice conversation.
Awesome. I'm
Yeah,
happy
fun
to.
for you.
Thanks so much for joining. This is super cool. So, yeah, this has been an Agile thing. I've been Matt Beam.
I've been Mike Markey.
I've been Jeff Singleton.
And you were Klaus Schwab.
Leopold.
No.
No,
No.
he's actually Leopold.
And you were
so
Klaus
sorry.
Leopold.
Leopold.
I got the guy from the WEF in my mind. You're Klaus Leopold. I'm so sorry.
We'll fix
edit
that in
part out.
post.
We'll fix it in post. Oh my God. Thank you so much, Klaus. Appreciate it.
Cool.
We'll be in
Thank you,
touch.
gentlemen, for having me.
Enjoy
Yes.
your
Bye.
weekend.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.